Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending the Thunder Bay Museum Historical Society's lecture as part of our series that we hold annually on the fourth Tuesday of every month. My name is Nick Duplessis. I just want to begin today by offering a land acknowledgement on behalf of the museum. The Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society would like to acknowledge the original custodians of the land and pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of Indigenous peoples. We would also like to recognize that the Thunder Bay Museum is on the traditional land of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the 1850 Robinson Superior Treaty, and to acknowledge the role of the Métis settlement in the development of our community. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. I want to remind everyone that is attending this online lecture that the event is being recorded, and I ask that everybody have their microphones muted and their video off throughout the lecture. I also want to remind everyone that there will be a question and answer period at the conclusion of the lecture, so you can either wait until the end to ask your question, or you can submit them through the chat as the lecture is ongoing, and we'll make sure that we're monitoring that. So with that, I will pass it on to our board president, Frank Gary.
Thank you, Nick. I have a quick bio here for Beth Hanna, our speaker tonight. Beth is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ontario Heritage Trust. She has a wealth of experience in the design and delivery of inclusive, multifaceted public programs and the creation of integrated approaches to the conservation and stewardship of heritage, culture and natural, tangible and intangible. She is passionate about giving voice to the diversity of experiences, traditions, and histories of Ontario's peoples and community. Thank you, Beth, for speaking to us tonight, and I am going to mute mine and turn off my video.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you very much to the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here, and it's exciting to share information, to share experience with you. I've been asked to speak about the work that the Trust has been doing on diversity and inclusion, and I'm going to ask my colleague Kevin Baksh just to pull the slide deck up so that I can begin. Thank you. And we're going to start actually with the slide on mission. So the vision, sorry. The Ontario Heritage Trust is an agency of the province of Ontario. We're a not-for-profit agency, and we have a broad mandate in a very large province. And so the work that we've been doing since 1967 has grown and evolved over those years. The vision and mission, which I'll share with you in a moment, really reflect the work that we're doing and the work that we envision doing as we move forward. The mission builds on the vision. If you go to the next slide, Kevin, and you can see it here. This mission relates to a fairly broad portfolio. We protect either through direct ownership or through conservation easement 481 properties across Ontario. We have a collection of about 1 million artifacts. We have created 1,285 provincial plaques in communities all over the province and beyond the province. And we also have, in a typical year, which this of course is not, in a typical year, we see about 1 million visitors at our sites and programs. And one of our major programs is Doors Open Ontario. And we see about 500,000 visitors at Doors Open sites over the course of that program in a given year. So that's generally who we are at a really high level. We do work in Thunder Bay as well, and you will know some of the projects that we work with in Thunder Bay. We work with the Thunder Bay field naturalists to protect an orchid reserve in your community. We protect the tourist pagoda, which is of course a National Historic Site and is also protected by a conservation easement held by the Trust. And of course the courthouse. The courthouse was a recipient of our 2019 Excellence in Conservation Award. We also have 47 plaques in your area of the province, which speaks to the deep history of Thunder Bay and that broader community. A lot of them are from the early years of the Trust Provincial Plaque Program and speak to geography and colonization and some Indigenous subjects. Most of them, as I say, were created in those early years, and some of them we'll be revisiting, quite frankly, including the one on the Robinson Superior Treaty. We'll be revisiting with the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs and the Indigenous communities in your area. We're also really pleased to say that the Thunder Bay Museum is part of our Digital Doors Open program. And at Fort William, the site of the residential school has also been part of the Digital Doors Open program. So those are important connections for us to your community. So I'm going to speak today about the path to a more inclusive narrative. And I started this discussion now several years ago. And these are the questions I started with. Whose heritage are we protecting and whose stories are we telling? All of this really boils down to those two questions. And there are tensions inherent in that discussion. There are differing values, there are differing objectives and differing needs. When you start looking at those questions, there are differing values, whose values are protected and who decides whose values are protected. How are traditional uses aligned with the society's desire to develop land? And we've determined just how important it is to understand the history of a place, the people who created it, their own context and their values in order to understand its meaning for us. So I'm going to start by talking about commitments. We've really made 3 commitments in this work. We've made a commitment to expanding the narrative, to work with communities across the province to share story in their own voices, to really to challenge the historical narrative and present a narrative that is honest and inclusive and authentic in its telling, and to ensure that more cultures, more voices are brought into that representation of the province's heritage. Those discussions build bridges of reconciliation, and they also create a sense of belonging. We've made a commitment to anti-racism. And if you follow our social media at all, you'll see a very strong commitment there to sharing information, to addressing parts of our community's heritage that are not well known or are not well understood. We've done a lot of work. I'll speak a fair bit tonight about the Uncle Tom's Cabin historic site in Dresden. And you can see an event that we did there. We've done a project called MyOntario, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And we've really focused our attention on bringing those stories forward. Our third commitment is to truth and reconciliation, and to work directly with Indigenous communities to protect land. The photo at the bottom of this slide is Thonakona. The Thonakona landscape is on one of our properties in Vaughan. And in 2013, after several years of planning with the Huron-Wendat Nation and the University of Toronto, we reburied 1,761 Huron-Wendat ancestors that had been removed from 11 communities. We reburied them in a respectful ceremony with the Huron-Wendat Nation and ensured that that land is now protected in perpetuity, not just as an ossuary for the nation, but as a sacred place. And that actually represents the largest reburial that's ever been taken place in North America. I'll talk a fair bit about provincial plaques over the next few minutes, so I won't talk too much about that one, but we've celebrated accomplishments. We've also acknowledged events that have been perhaps not a very pleasant part of our past. And we're also doing things like working with the Moose Cree Nation on Moose Factory Island on a retelling of the history of Moose Factory Island, the Hudson's Bay Company staff house, which we own on the island and is pictured there, but ensuring that the voice of the Moose Cree and their history on this place is also well represented. So we made 3 commitments and we've taken 3 actions, and that's really what I want to focus on tonight, are those 3 commitments and the 3 actions. We took direct action for all of our programming and our communications to ensure that we apply a diversity, inclusion, and equity lens to those discussions. And I'll give you a few examples of each of these. The second was that we reviewed all 1,285 provincial plaques, and we we assessed what we had, what stories we'd told, we identified the gaps and the challenges and the strengths. We also reviewed our property holdings, both easements and owned properties, to identify strengths and gaps in that portfolio, and all of that to tell us where we should be focusing our attention and our energy as we move forward. First, we did some research. We did a lot of research, and I just wanted to share a few slides with you about some things that I thought were interesting. There's a lot of work on across the globe happening in this space. And it's important work, it's interesting work, and I think people are doing really unique things. In Australia, the Heritage Council of Victoria and the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council have really started to talk about shared values, about working together to better reflect a holistic view of Victoria's history. And they've talked about the fact that instead of looking at Aboriginal values and non-Aboriginal values, they would really like to recognize the fact that many places hold significant history to both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in their communities, and that very often the history is a shared one. So an interesting project. There's lots of information on their website about their project, and a lot of really good material available there. I also looked at Historic England, and Historic England took 4 heritage initiatives to focus their work. They've been working on this now for several years, but you can see there the 4 areas of focus, and they're really committed to bringing greater attention to the histories of marginalized, under-researched, and underrepresented groups whose contributions have not been properly acknowledged. And they've got some very interesting work on their website, and I encourage you to have a look. The discussion of heritage value in Canada it has again been one that's been evolving, and there are people doing some really interesting work in Canada as well. I looked to the standards and guidelines for the slide that you have there. The Canadian Register of Historic Places talks about the fact that a single place may have more than one heritage value. It can be recognized and valued for different reasons by different communities, and those values may change over time. And so as our understanding of history develops, the needs and the context of the community may change. And so we may need to also consider our statements of significance and our assessments of heritage value in a more evolutionary way than we have in the past. So not done and set in stone, but a little bit more open. 2 books that I'd like to recommend. Ned Kaufman has a really useful book called Place, Race, and Story. It's been out for a couple of years. Ned talks about storyscapes as just an approach, a different approach. So instead of starting from an artifact, he talks about identifying sites that relate to a theme. So you start with a theme and a story, and then discover how those relate over time, and the ways that they connect people to their neighborhoods and their cities. So he talks about using an array of professionals to identify places and make that connection of place to community and understand the significance of those. A really interesting book. The last reference that I'll make is to Larajane Smith's book, The Uses of Heritage. And she really talks about heritage as a way of knowing or a way of seeing, and as a cultural construct, an overlay to the history of a community, and that it really can be applied independently in each community. So she talks about it being, its history being bound up in power relations. And again, it can be a dynamic social and cultural process and a way of knowing and seeing. So some interesting things to think about if you're looking at this topic. And there are lots more. So we did we made 3 commitments, and we took 3 actions. The first of the actions was to apply that diversity, inclusion, and equity lens to all of our programming and all of our communications, our website, our social media. We started by revisiting our interpretation and exhibits. This is the main exhibit at Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site in Dresden. And in this exhibit, we tackled straight on the issue of slavery in Canada. It's an interesting exhibit. It's an important exhibit because it does really look at a topic that some people don't know about, but some people actually just don't want to know about. And sometimes that discourse is challenging, and that it causes tensions. And if you go to the next slide, Kevin, I'm just going to give a few more examples here. So we've taken on a number of topics for provincial plaques or at our sites. We worked with the Ontario Human Rights Commission on a dialogue on human rights. We brought people together from various parts of society to talk with us about human rights. We did a provincial plaque about the Ontario Human Rights Code. We celebrated the work of Hugh Burnett and the National Unity Association and the very, very early roots of what is now the Ontario Human Rights Code, but the work in Dresden to create and across Ontario to create that first step, those first steps towards a human rights code. And we've also done a provincial plaque on sexual diversity at the University of Toronto, sexual diversity activism at the University of Toronto. So we've worked with a lot of different communities to share those histories and to talk to people about those battles for rights and for recognition. I talked a minute ago about the exhibit at Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site, the story of slavery in Canada, the history of freedom seekers. Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site takes its name from Harriet Beecher Stowe's anti-slavery novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. We know that novel was, the main character was based on the life of Josiah Henson. And Josiah Henson escaped slavery. He fled northwards with his wife and his 4 children, and he crossed the Niagara River into Upper Canada in 1830. And he established this settlement. He worked with other people to establish the Dawn settlement. In 1841, it began as a refuge for fugitives from slavery who escaped to Canada from the United States. And it was established to provide Black Canadians the skills they needed to prosper and really to tackle and dispel the racist beliefs of proponents of slavery who argued that Blacks were independent or incapable of independent living. Sorry, Kevin, if you can just go back for a minute on that slide. So one of the things I wanted to note is that when you get into this work, you have to be willing to make mistakes. You have to accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. We have along the way made mistakes with the best of intentions, setting out, having done our research and our homework. We've still made some mistakes and tripped along the way. And one of the things that I'll share with you is that when we first went into our discussions in Dresden, we wanted very much to tell the Hugh Burnett story, and the community wasn't ready yet. The Black community wasn't ready yet. And we met with them and talked with them about what we were trying to accomplish. And it took several years of us working with that site, which we took over in 2005 from the Ministry of Tourism. It took several years of us working with that site to build the trust and confidence with the community to be able to tell that story and tell it well. And it's been very successful. Our discussions since have been very successful, but we went in too quickly. And one of the things I've learned along the way working with a variety of communities across the province is it takes time to build those relationships. And you have to be willing to put the time in to do that. So sometimes the discourse is challenging. Sometimes public values simply contradict. This is a site called Nachmawaning, which we co-manage, we own and co-manage with the Chippewa of Nawash unceded First Nation. It was scheduled to be subdivided for cottage lots by a local developer. The province of Ontario purchased this land or parts of this land in the trust's name, and we established a co-management agreement with the Nawash. We have a very strong and vital partnership on this land. It is sacred to the Anishinaabe people. And we have, you can see the subdivision lots on the slide on the lower left. We initially purchased the ones in red. That was our first purchase. And we've been working with the nation to purchase the additional lots that are outlined in blue to protect as much of that area as we can, working with them. And we, as of April of this year, finished that grouping of acquisitions. And this is Miptun, who is one of the elders of the Nawash. This is a quote from him about just being respectful and protecting the sacred place and what the land is, understanding the land as an entity and not a commodity. We take our role as stewards very seriously, and we're really appreciative of the gift of knowledge that we receive, not only from the land, but from the Nawash as it relates to this land. We also look at truth-telling, which is an important part of truth and reconciliation. And I mentioned quickly before the work we're doing on Moose Factory Island in understanding the history of the Moose Cree and the desires of the nation, the wishes of the nation in relation to this site and tourism on the island. And we're working with them to expand the stories and perspectives that are portrayed and interpreted at the Hudson's Bay Company sites, and making sure that their voice is heard and that we are creating a more balanced and respectful narrative with respect to this site. Continuing in that truth-telling, we were asked in 2015, 2016 to do a provincial plaque commemorating Champlain's journeys in Ontario. We agreed to do that on the basis that, on the agreement that we would do a provincial plaque if we could reach agreement on a text with a group of people we considered to be really important in this discussion. And so we were asked by the Office of Francophone Affairs, we worked with the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Curve Lake First Nation, the Saugeen First Nations, and the Algonquins of I can never say this, I'm sorry, Pikwakanagan. I apologize to the nation for really messing that up. And as well as a number of geographers and historians. And we did come to agreement on a plaque text, and it's provided now in 6 languages, including French and English, and Anishinaabe, Montaigne, Innu, Mohawk, and Wendat. And so it was just an interesting journey to take what was thought to be originally a fairly straightforward subject to be something that was much more open and much more honest about Champlain's journeys. I've included on the slide 2 quotes, one from then Grand Chief Sui of the Huron-Wendat Nation, who said the damage was done. Epidemics killed us. When Champlain left in 1638, it was like an atomic bomb would have fallen. And that was the impact of those epidemics on his people. And then you can see the humor from Vernon Root of the Saugeen First Nation as well. We knew that in order for Champlain to reach Georgian Bay, he'd have to enter through the access point at the mouth of the French River. So the Anishinaabe people assembled 300 warriors to meet him there, just in case he and his people were going to be up to no good. Moving along on truth-telling, recognizing connections to the land. We've been working with communities to honor their traditional territories, their traditional connections to the land, and honoring the tradition bearers and the knowledge keepers that we work with. And you can see a number of examples there. We use our magazine as well, Heritage Matters, as well as provincial plaques and other programs to celebrate those connections to the land. Residential schools, a very important topic right now. We have tackled, if I can use that phrase, we've addressed that subject in some of our issues of Heritage Matters, some of the discussions we've had in Heritage Matters, which is our magazine. We have 2 provincial plaques, one at the Mohawk Institute Residential School and one at Shingwauk Hall. Both of them need to be replaced, and we're well into discussions on Shingwauk Hall. We're opening discussions on the Mohawk Institute plaque. But both need to be reworked with the community to determine how we want to tell the story. I'm going to talk about Shingwauk Hall a little bit more in just a minute. We've also been gathering stories in 2017 as part of our 150th anniversary celebrations. We opened a discussion about changing that narrative, inviting new voices to the discussion of our history. We have really started with the fact that we have 10,000 years plus of history in this province. And we wanted people to share their experiences, their identities, their values, and their aspirations to build a deeper understanding, to showcase our diversity, and to create a lasting record. And in this year 2017, we did collect 432 new stories that were added to our website, and the resources there, it continues to grow, not as quickly, but it continues to grow. We've been looking at ways to expand Asian heritage content, and for the most part, we've been doing that with social media, but we've also been looking at provincial plaques, and we've also been working with fairly regular content through both social media and our magazine from archives, Canada's LGBTQ+ archives. And Doors Open Ontario continues to celebrate a diversity of sites, whether it's mosques or Black heritage sites or residential schools. There are a variety of sites in the program. We did move to a digital version in 2020, and 2021 has a bit of a hybrid. There are a few in-person events, but most of it is still online. So some really important sites being shared there as well. We celebrate Treaties Recognition Week, working with Indigenous communities and with the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, again, to sort of shine a spotlight on the treaties and the importance of those treaties, and to help people to learn more about treaties in their areas. We also do an annual lecture, and the annual lecture is an opportunity. It's really a platform for thought-provoking individuals to challenge our perspectives and to offer new insights, to give us new considerations about the ways that we relate to our past and our communities. And these are 2 examples we've just recorded. This year's will be online. We've just recorded a really wonderful lecture by Edward Bertinsky, and it will be available from November the 9th to December the 9th, and I'll send information through to Scott about that. We continue to use our magazine and our newsletter, Heritage Matters More, All of these are free resources. If you're interested in heritage matters more, let me know and we'll make sure that you get it. So I talked about reviewing provincial plaques to identify gaps and challenges. In broadening our dialogue, we did undertake to review the 1,285 provincial plaques that we've unveiled since 1955. Kevin, you can go ahead to the next. Thank you. And we really wanted to understand where the content was outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete. So historiography changes over time, research changes over time, more things become available, but we also have a better understanding of what history we're telling and whose story we're telling. With a plaque program that's been created over 7 decades, we knew we would have some plaques that needed to be reconsidered. And we acknowledged that for many subjects commemorated by plaques, the story that was being presented was really just a small part of a much larger topic. And you can see there the breakdown of themes that we've identified over time and what we did. So we looked at the plaques to identify information that was inaccurate or incomplete, that used archaic, inappropriate, or inaccessible language. So if it made us wince, if it made us really think we didn't like the language that was in it, we flagged it. Exclusionary plaque subjects or texts, and linguistic representation to make sure we were using the languages that needed to be reflected in the plaques that we have. So we went from there and we found that we had a significant number that provided a limited perspective. Women's history and Indigenous history were both underrepresented. About 5% included inaccessible language or language we would consider to be inappropriate as it related to race and ethnicity. Some had simply outdated and incomplete content. And about 5% related to diverse cultural experiences in Indigenous communities that could be presented in additional languages. So we wanted to acknowledge the issue and use the website to provide our information. We talked very directly on the website about the process we've been through and the fact that many of our plaques don't just represent a very small part of the discussion. We're trying to use the website to add resources and tell a more complete story, but we've also identified a number of plaques that quite simply need to be removed and replaced. And we're working with advisors and experts to do that work. If you go ahead, thank you. So we started by putting something on the website. As I say, there's a bigger discussion about this subject. Join the conversation, inviting people to be part of that discussion about the subjects. We undertook some very specific and targeted priority plaques, and I mentioned a few of these earlier. You can go ahead, Kevin. So some of these looked at connections to land. The Champlain plaque is here as an example. So we identified some plaques that simply needed to be done that hadn't been done at all. And that work was challenging and interesting and built some new relationships for us. And we continue to do that. We have a list of priority subjects that we want to do. We also then started to look at plaques that needed to be replaced. And this is Shingwauk Hall. The plaque that we have at Shingwauk Hall is inaccurate, it's incomplete. It doesn't certainly recognize what we understand to be the truth of residential schools. And so beside the plaque, first of all, you'll see that someone had painted or thrown paint, red paint on the plaque. We've been working with, and we had already started a project with Algoma University and the children of the Shingwauk Hall Alumni Association. And we decided together that we would leave the plaque up with the paint as an expression of anger and as an expression of the community's response to the residential school discussion. Beside it, we've put the sign up that you see there. It's in 4 languages. It's including two Indigenous language, Anishinaabemowin and Swampy Cree. as well as French and English. And you can see there the enlargement of what the English says. We come straight out and say it's not accurate. It's an incomplete telling of our history, and we recognize and apologize for the misrepresentation and the pain that it's caused. And that's been part of the work that we've been doing with Shingwauk Hall and on other issues related to residential schools. It's that truth-telling around what really happened and the need to build those bridges in order to get to reconciliation. Then we reviewed our property holdings to begin to identify the strengths and the gaps of the property holdings. So just as a reminder, we have 200 properties that we own on behalf of the Crown and another 281 properties that are protected by conservation easements that are held by the Trust. It's a big portfolio and it's a big province. You can't see the image, and I'm sorry that that's true, but I wanted to show some of the detail just to give you a sense of how detailed our analysis is. And I will tell you, I'll show you a few more on the next slide in a moment, but all of those can be found on the website and you can go in and look at them if you're interested. So it does, the portfolio has a diverse collection. They're all provincially significant. And we do protect cultural heritage sites, cultural landscapes, and natural heritage. And we have a really broad and interesting portfolio. This slide, which you can't read, is about the archaeological types that are protected. First, we looked at the strengths. So the strengths of the portfolio, we have a great collection, diverse features, and they're preserved and provided for the benefit of Ontarians. We have properties in almost all tourist regions of the province. We have a broad range of ages and architectural styles and functions so that you can see, it provides us with a lot of interpretive opportunities for the public. And our natural heritage properties are also quite broad in their representation. So really a valuable portfolio. However, there are gaps, there's no question. These three graphs show the architectural style analysis, the dominant vegetation community groups in our natural heritage portfolio, and the historical function analysis across our portfolio. And again, I didn't share them to go into any detail on them, but to show you the depth of analysis that we did. And you can see them on the website if you're interested in that kind of detail. But you can see the gaps we identified, and they're not a surprise. Immigrant communities and refugees, racialized peoples, Indigenous communities, women's history, LGBTQ2, architectural styles, and certain vegetation community groups are missing or not well represented in the portfolio. So we have some work to do there. So all of that to say that we've been challenging and re-examining traditional interpretations of the past. We've recognized the more than 10,000 years of Ontario's history and our responsibility to ensure that that is actually reflected in the programming that we do, the properties that we protect, and the stories that we tell. There's a lot of work yet to do to provide that more comprehensive and objective treatment of human history, values, and beliefs in Ontario. We've taken a cultural landscape approach to, no, sorry, Kevin, if you can go back one. We've taken a cultural landscape approach to the work that we're doing. So identifying natural and cultural heritage values and features in a shared area. And we've also integrated all 7 of the Trust's heritage interests. We have an opportunity through our legislation to protect properties of historical, architectural, archaeological, recreational, aesthetic, natural, and scenic interests, which is a unique combination of interests if you look at the roles of land trusts across North America. And so it's an important role for us, but it does lead us to an integrated approach to conservation. And over the last, I would say, dozen years, we've been looking at really making sure that our approach is quite well integrated. And then also that we build collaborations and partnerships with a range of individuals and communities, and also recognize that they have different connections to the preservation of the planet. And the intent here is to provide a sense of identity that's created through that interplay of landmarks, history, traditions, memories, and stories. So we've rethought our models, and I've talked a bit about how we've revisited those models. We have a lot of work to do in opening conversations with cultural groups and building relationships with Indigenous peoples whose history is not reflected in our holdings or in our storytelling. And as I say, we're treating our assessments of value more as living documents as we understand better what's represented. So it's back to that, whose heritage do we protect and whose stories do we tell? As we move to just the last, this is a for further information slide. I just wanted to take a minute to summarize, and I think I have maybe 2 minutes left. I started off by talking about 3 commitments: commitment to expanding the narrative, to truth and reconciliation, and to anti-racism, and 3 actions that we've taken to really do a deep dive into the work that we're already doing. So we looked at adding a diversity, inclusion, and equity lens to all of our programming and communications, reviewing our provincial plaque portfolio to identify not only the strengths, but also the gaps and the challenges, and the same for our property holdings to identify where the strengths are, but also where the gaps are and where we should be focusing our resources. I've learned a lot over the last several years of this work. And I will say, I think the most important things are to take the time to build the relationships and build the trust, to come to an understanding of common objectives when you're working with other groups. Doesn't matter who they are, frankly, what kind of group they are, or whether they're a nation or a community group. Recognize you'll probably make mistakes, but you need to set out with an intent that is sincere, and then apologize and do better if you do make mistakes. I've had to learn to, and I've actually encouraged my staff to do this as well, but to simply say, I don't know and I don't understand. Can you help me to understand better? And I think the most important in any of this relationship building is to show respect and humility as you go into the discussions. And I'll leave it there and open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Scott Bradley here, Executive Director of the Thunder Bay Museum. Yes, the floor is open for questions and answers. So for those of you attending, please do type in your questions into the Q&A function. You can find that button at the bottom, or it should be at the bottom of your Zoom application. And you can also, if you can't find that, use the chat feature, and I'll keep an eye on those and then prompt those questions. So a couple questions that have already come in. The first one is, you gave an overview, but can you tell us more about the process for pursuing acquisitions for preservation?
You mean any acquisition?
I think that was what they meant.
Okay, so it depends on how it comes in. If it's offered as a donation, if it's something that the trust is pursuing to fill a gap or to respond to a need with one of the community groups that we work with, they come in to us in all different ways. We have a quite specific evaluation process. So our first step is to go to our board and advise them of the interest. And if the board is interested based on our preliminary overviews, we do a preliminary overview, present to the board, then we will do that really detailed analysis. And we have a series of questions. We have a detailed analysis that is undertaken by a multidisciplinary team of trust professionals. And if we don't have quite the right professionals, we will bring people in to assist us. And then we will take a report to the board. We do have a detailed acquisition plan, a detailed acquisition policy for the trust, which identifies the qualities that must be met, and then also the additional considerations. And so when we go to the board, we take a very detailed analysis of the property, of its significance, of its provincial significance, if that's where the significance lies, of where it compares to the rest of the portfolio. And we also have to ensure that it's sustainable, that we can actually, there are partners we can work with, that there are ways to ensure the sustainability of the property. So if the question is about a specific property, just reach out and be in touch with me, and I'm happy to give you a little more detail. That's a pretty broad, vague answer, but.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question that's come in is, do you ever divest of holdings?
Very rarely. Very rarely. It happens from time to time. We have, in the past, we've had occasions where we've made a determination that a property is best managed locally or by another conservation body, and we have moved to divest, but it's fairly rare.
We do have a comment here. Thank you so much, Beth. It's really exciting to hear the trust's projects, challenges, and approaches, relationships, and humility for sure. Many thanks for sharing tonight. So,
you're welcome.
Another question that's come in is, could you tell us about Wolford Chapel and the process for that acquisition or the management of it?
I can't tell you that I have a lot of detailed information on how we acquired Wolford Chapel. So Wolford Chapel, for those of you who don't know, it is one of the properties that the trust owns that's not in Ontario. It is the Simcoe family chapel. The trust holds it on behalf of the people of Ontario. We work with local experts and local community members for its preservation and its access, and we work with them to tell the story of the chapel.
Okay. Just a reminder to everyone, you can use that Q&A function to enter in questions, and I highly encourage you to do so. If you can't find that, please do use the chat.
I'll just say while we're waiting on whether there are any additional questions, I did in my last slide add the trust website. There's lots of information on the website, but I also encourage you, if you're interested in the work, to follow us on one of our social media platforms. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can see some of the work there that's being done, but there's also lots of detailed assessment and analysis on our website as well. We're just getting ready in November to launch a collections portal, which will for the first time provide the public with digital access to some of our collection holdings, which we're very excited about. That's never been possible for us in the past. And that came through one of those grant applications, Scott.
Oh yes, those are wonderful. So, okay, then I'll ask the technical question. Do you know what piece of software you're using to provide that access? Okay.
Wrong person.
Yeah, I understand.
I can connect you, but yeah, no.
Okay, excellent. So you hinted at the beginning, about some of the work that you're doing in the Thunder Bay area. Is there any, kind of previews or things that are being worked on that we may be seeing changes or new initiatives in our area in the future?
Well, I mentioned, I mean, some of the sites that we protect are not ours. So the easement properties, you know, we work very closely with landowners to ensure that the cultural heritage values that are identified, or the natural heritage values that are identified in the easement, are protected as changes are made. So we work in partnership to manage change on some of those properties, or to simply hold on change that just doesn't serve to protect the values of those properties. The work with the Orchid Reserve is exciting and special, and I don't see any major changes there, at least not in the immediate future. I think what you'll see is probably, as we continue to analyze our provincial plaque portfolio, I think you'll see that we will revisit some of those texts, and we might be reaching out to individuals or organizations like yours in the community to help us to better understand context, so that we can put better information on our website to supplement the stories. Some of them we might need to just rework entirely, but that's one of the things that we're working with coming out of that provincial plaque analysis, is where should we be putting our resources and energies. We can't say we have X number of plaques that we need to redo and we're going to do them all at once. It just doesn't work that way. We can't do all of that research and replace all of those plaques in a really short, condensed period of time. So we're looking at ways to share that information differently, and to address the ones that really are problematic. In other parts of the province right now, for example, we are in the process of redoing 4 of our Black history plaques, working with Black historians and experts in those fields to tell a more inclusive story on those plaques. So some of them we will be replacing, some of them will continue to just find other ways to tell those stories. And there will be opportunities for us as we move forward to reach out into the community and seek some support on some of that work.
Excellent. Just a reminder, folks, if you do have questions, please do put those in the Q&A box. Another question from me, well, I guess for some of our folks watching, you know, are there opportunities to volunteer expertise to the Ontario Heritage Trust?
That's not a question we get very often. We do have volunteer programs at some of our properties. And some of our properties really rely on volunteers, particularly those that are operating as museums. A lot of our partner groups have volunteer corps or volunteer groups that support their work. And we try not to step on toes when we're working with community organizations. And so, you know, often if people are interested in volunteering, we can connect them to a partner in that community to you know, maybe help that way. We don't have very many individuals in the province that simply volunteer time to the work, but I'm always happy to talk about it.
All right, I'm going to put out one last call for questions, and also prompt any of our panelists if anyone has any questions from that group as well. Frank, did you have a question?
Not a question. Just wanted to thank Beth very much for taking the time out of her evening to do this for us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you for on my personal behalf for taking the time to join us. This was very exciting to learn about all of your work and to see the breadth and scope of everything. It's very impressive, and I'm in awe of just the scope of all the stuff that you have to manage and handle. And I love the analysis. I'm always a numbers guy. I'm always, you know, show me the numbers, show me the justification. So I love seeing the charts and the graphs that you've really dug into. What do we have? How do we know we're doing a good job with it? So I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Well,
if there's no other questions, Nick, did you have any closing remarks?
No, I think that you and Frank summarized very, very well. I just will thank Beth again for taking the time to speak to us, and the presentation was very, very informative, and I think it was beneficial both for the audience members and for our museum as we look to take similar steps in building and working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So thank you again, Beth, for your time, and thank you to everyone who attended tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.